I'm Joe Wyatt. I'll be giving a presentation on a recent social study on stakeholder engagement and the understanding of nature-based solutions. Just very briefly, as we've gone over it in some detail, nature-based solutions can typically help promote circular economy, whereas the typical grey infrastructure can be seen as treating the symptoms. They have multiple benefits, do NBS. They can be seen as treating the symptoms as well as helping to resolve the initial issues of climate change. With a couple examples here of salt marshes, which can help with tidal wave action and increase the tidal zone for more habitation, as well as hybrid nature-based solutions such as these, which can help with shoreline stability. So this study, if it wants to go on, oh, there we go. Yeah, so this study was based or draws from previous research done in North Norfolk, which focused on public perception of innovative coastal defence materials. In order to cast a wider net, we wanted to see any perceptions of other stakeholder groups, which I'll go into in a bit more detail, as well as we studied various other locations. We lent into public engagement as well. I'll be discussing some of the challenges and some of the recommendations for future projects regarding that too. So briefly on the methodology, it was a structured questionnaire with both qualitative and quantitative questions. The three stakeholder groups, as mentioned, were the general public, infrastructure operators, and business, landowners, and decision makers. The three research areas were Cornwall, Isle of Wight, and North Norfolk. In the brackets there, they're just between the towns that were mainly focused on, but we definitely got some responses outside those town areas. To spread the word and get the questionnaire out there, we sent emails directly shared and posted in local Facebook groups, as well as using paid advertisement, which I'll go into a bit more in a moment. So initially, we created a Facebook page to complement public engagement, and over about a 2-month period, it interacted with about 16,500 unique users, both through posts and advertisements. There were 2 ad campaigns, which you can see in the graph here. The first one was over a longer period of time. However, it was, in terms of scope of the area, it was a smaller area that we advertised to. And then the second advertisement campaign, which is the larger spike there, was over a shorter period of time, but with a much larger radius in order to capture more people. And you can see that seemed to work out quite well. In terms of online engagement, you don't have to, might not understand all of this because it's quite a lot of information, but I'll just go over a couple of things. The most cost-effective campaign was in Cornwall in terms of clicks and filling out surveys. The least cost-effective was Isle of Wight campaign, or specifically the second Isle of Wight campaign. You can see there on the bottom one, completion per percentage was 144%, which is surprising, but that was because we initially had it so you could only log in using your Google account to fill out the questionnaire. We believed after a little while that that was actually stopping people from wanting to fill it out, so we lifted that. However, that resulted in some duplicate entries. So yeah, but we accounted for those and we could easily tell which were duplicates. So lots of local Facebook groups were approached, some spanning up to members ranging from a few thousand to up to 20,000. They were quite beneficial. We had some difficulty with mainly the groups in the Isle of Wight, however. We had lots of comments saying that the survey was a scam, lots of skepticism, and we believe this stems from some Euroscepticism in the post-Brexit Britain. We had some mention of the fact that it's a EU project and they don't trust it. So this is an important note for future projects in the UK specifically, obviously, as well as looking at local areas, perhaps historical voting patterns. You might want to tailor your certain projects around that. Just an overview of the results. Many different analyses are used on such things as the ranking of importance aspects of coastal protection measures, as well as whether people have actually heard of NBS and witnessed local flooding in the last 10 years, among many other variables. So we tested those against local and non-local residents, sex, age, impaired mobility, coastal hobbyists, stakeholder groups, as mentioned, and grouped areas in terms of historical pilot projects. There has been one, as previously mentioned, in North Norfolk, but in the areas that we surveyed in, there haven't really been many NBS pilot projects, whereas there have been some in Isle of Wight and Cornwall, mainly Penzance and Newlyn. So that was something we looked at too. Typically, all of these groups seem to have fairly similar preferences across the board, which would indicate similar beliefs as well. However, there were some deviance from this, and I'll go into that after this slide. And this is just a brief overview of the responses. So we've got a fairly even spread across sex and age, with no responses from below the age of 26. And in terms of stakeholder group, we didn't receive any responses from the infrastructure operators. However, we received about 2/3 of our responses from the public and 1/3 from business, landowners, and decision makers, with a total of 81 responses. So in terms of responses to the ranking aspect of coastal protection measures, this is we can see that the level of protection was ranked highest on average, followed by environmental benefits and safety jointly, then maintenance cost, and then aesthetics and capital cost jointly, and then finally recreational benefits. These are the significant results we found. I'll go over a few of them now. So this question was specifically, participants were given an image of some ecologically enhanced rock armor, which is a hybrid nature-based solution, and asked if they would like it implemented locally. They weren't provided any information. Their responses on the left indicate fairly high rankings. However, after being granted more information on the benefits of the product, they tended to rank it much higher. And this is statistically significant. So this sort of highlights the importance of education, especially in the areas that you are implementing NBS. Interestingly, we found non-primary residents ranked the protection aspect of coastal protection measures higher than primary residents, which is something we would have thought would be the other way around. There could be there's lots of different explanations for this. Some may be that it's been seen that those living closer to natural hazards or things like coastal erosion often have an optimism bias, where if you're living in a place, you're not really wanting it to go underwater, so you don't really think it will. Maybe you have a bit of a bias there. Also, historically, in the UK, a lot of coastal towns are sort of on the socio-economic decline, which is also linked to lower education, which is something highlighted throughout the study, that education is quite important for the understanding of these kinds of things. So that could also be a reason why. I'm not sure if it's been discussed already, but there is typically a higher upfront cost for nature-based solutions. However, over time, they're much more sustainable and they save money. And we posed this to the participants, and overwhelmingly, yes, they accept the higher upfront cost. However, if they do not accept it, we found they're more likely to come from the business, landowner, and decision maker stakeholder group. I won't go over all this, but this is just a few questions with yes, no answers. On probably the most important one here is, have you heard of NBS, which is on the left of yes and no. So it's a fairly even spread. However, Cornwall seems to be much higher in education or knowledge of NBS as opposed to the other two. This could be because it has historical pilot studies in the past. However, that wouldn't explain why the Isle of Wight is saying they don't see it as much as do. So just to briefly go over that, what I've just discussed. The aspects of coastal protection measures, we had protection as the highest, safety, environmental benefits, and the rest there, with recreational benefits being the lowest. We found, obviously, as I've mentioned a few times, information provided resulted in more positivity. So it really highlights the importance of stakeholder education in terms of nature-based solutions. It really drives home the importance of it and makes people much more receptive of them. We had positive and neutral perceptions of coastal protection measures in general and on tourism, as well as positive responses to the effects coastal protection measures, how they affect businesses and certain professions, so that people believe they act positively towards them, as well as positive effects of hybrid nature-based solutions and nature-based solutions on stakeholder professions as well as infrastructure. So generally, it's overall positive with a few neutral bits in there, no real negative views, as well as for positive or neutral responses to NBS sustainability. So as I've mentioned, increasing stakeholder education is probably one of the most important. We found across most of the tests that generally all the stakeholder groups, all the age groups, all the sex groups, they had similar preferences apart from the ones I've just discussed, which were the minority. So overall, maybe a broad approach to user stakeholder education is quite important for future projects in order to get the local inhabitants on board, with a focus on product benefits, and not really worrying too much about the fact that often it's higher upfront cost of nature-based solutions. You can sort of highlight the fact that the overall maintenance cost over time is reduced due to the sustainability efforts of it. One of the points of focus would be the fact that if there is any contention locally, we found that it's more likely to be from the business, landowners, and decision-maker stakeholder group. So future projects might be important for them to keep in mind that this might be an area of contention with that stakeholder group. So maybe have something ready. Don't be fearful of wanting to inform them. It's really helpful to, and this is corroborated in other literature, that it's really helpful to create an open dialogue between that stakeholder group, but also between stakeholder groups in general, get everyone talking, and it generally results in positive outcomes. And on top of that, you can highlight the positive benefits on business and tourism, which we found every stakeholder group seemed to think was a positive aspect. And yeah, thank you. And any questions?
Hi, Chris. Is your hand up there?
Hi. Yeah, just a quick one on the cost. I work in nature-based solutions in fluvial systems, and I'm surprised at your statement on the higher upfront costs there, because that's definitely not the case in fluvial circumstances. We've got much lower upfront costs with nature-based solutions, and just wondering what's going on there and what the difference is.
Yeah, I think it was from the information we looked at, it was sort of an overarching thing. There may be some deviance from that, such as the examples you mentioned. However, I think some of the examples we looked at, we did find that they had a higher upfront cost. However, we may have missed some in that circumstance, but in the case where it is higher, stakeholders don't seem to mind regardless.
Yeah, I mean, what we found is a different proportion of the cost profile. So if you have the same amount, say £1 million to spend on nature-based or capital infrastructure, much higher proportion of the funding goes into the engagement and preparation works and discussions, with a smaller percentage on the actual capital or structural works, as opposed to a hard engineering project where smaller amounts go into the upfront engagement, but then a large percentage of the capital goes into the construction and structural works. But
yeah, I mean, yeah, that might be a bit of a limitation of the question we asked. We didn't look into the specifics of the cost, and maybe missed a few, but yeah, I think the point still stands that if there is a higher upfront cost, people are okay with it. And like you said, in some examples there isn't, so that's even better, I'd say. So cheers for
that. David, Sander.
Not
sure if it's just me,
David.
Still no joy, I'm afraid.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, just wanted to add about the higher upfront cost. That was more specifically comparing a very traditional grey infrastructure approach on the coast compared to a hybrid approach where we're adding benefits through hybrid nature-based solutions onto the grey coastal infrastructure, where obviously you could just build coastal infrastructure as is and it will protect at that stage, but adding those additional hybrid aspects on top of it, which provides the kind of biodiversity improvements and perhaps additional kind of environmental benefits, as well as perhaps make it look better, provide educational benefits. All of that stuff is obviously costing more money than not including it. But the outcome of that research that Joe just outlined basically said that people see that as a worthwhile additional investment.
Thank you. That's their environmental enhancements in effect on hard infrastructure. Yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Great. Ruby, have you got a hand raised?
Yes, hi there. I was just wondering how effective you found your Facebook marketing to be, and if you think it was a worthwhile process.
So the advertising was definitely the most effective part. There were some limitations in terms of going for Facebook groups. We initially saw them. There were, I think, one was 27,000 members.
Yeah.
And we thought that was great. We could reach out to that many people. Like I said, it's very area specific and how skeptical people seem to be of stuff like that. On top of this, we did create a Facebook page sort of to enhance the officiality of the project. However, we couldn't post in these Facebook groups as the page. You had to do it as a person. We didn't want to do it as a fresh account because we feel that would look even more dodgy. So we used one of the researchers' accounts, and yeah, so it came from a personal account, and we didn't receive a lot of engagement from those posts. We mainly received engagement from the Facebook advertising, which I would say is worth it. And I mean, if you have the time to post in groups, definitely. But you have to keep in mind you have to speak with admins, make sure you're allowed to even post there, and because a lot of them are fairly topic specific as well. So yeah, we mainly did it through Facebook, but in future projects, it'd definitely be worth, especially in terms of reaching out to a younger audience, perhaps doing it through Instagram and stuff like that. I believe they're much more prevalent on that site and in those apps than Facebook now. So that might be a good note as well. But also, due to the obviously pandemic, we had to do everything online. I believe we would have benefited from doing some things in person, actually going to these areas. However, that wasn't really possible. So.
Thank you.
Great, we've got another hand. Is it Han?
Oh, yes, hi. Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. I have two small questions, but first I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Hanne from SARCC from Belgium, and I do research within the Vives University College, also in SARCC. And we do also a lot of questionnaires and surveys and so on. So that's why I found it really interesting. My first question is, yeah, I remember the scores of all the aspects that you linked to nature-based solutions, and one of them was aesthetics. And I saw aesthetics scored really low. If we compare that to the case in Belgium, so the nature-based solutions at our coasts, that scores really high. It's really one of the first things we need to consider before we implement the nature-based solution. So I was wondering, why is that so low, do you think?
Yeah, so there's possibly a few reasons for that. I don't know whether it's a regional thing, a national thing. Maybe there's just general different preferences across different countries, as well as the fact that these rankings were initially presented to the individuals as a matrix, and they had to rank one above the other. They couldn't rank them the same. So whether that, if they could rank them individually, would have a different effect on the actual scoring is unknown. However, the aesthetics ranking did have quite a wide spread compared to, I think it was tied with capital costs. So there was a variance of scoring there. But yeah, why that is could be down to those reasons. It'll be useful, I guess, for future projects to see how people ranked aesthetics in a void rather than comparing it to the other benefits or costs.
Yeah, could be, but maybe it's also linked to the amount of people who live at the coast. So like our coast is really completely fully built. We don't have much space left anymore because of the tourism. So I'm not aware of all the locations you presented, but I think there are not a lot of people living on those coasts, or am I wrong?
I'm not sure compared to yours. I don't think they're very densely populated, but they are fairly populated. I can't give a concrete answer without looking up some statistics, but from what you've mentioned, it sounds like perhaps your area is more densely populated, so that could be a reason why as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I had another small question. It's related to your Twitter account. I saw Twitter social SARCC or something like that, but I couldn't find it online. Is it still available, or? I saw something like a print screen of Twitter, I think, and it said if you fill in this survey, you can win, blah, blah, blah. And I tried to find that account, but I couldn't find it anymore.
Oh, yeah. So I think that was actually a Facebook.
It was Facebook
account.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't create a Twitter account. Yeah, so SARCC Social Research. I believe that's still available. That was actually created at the beginning of the study, so that's still there. It's just to sort of give some credence towards the importance of the issue. So, yeah, Facebook.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Great. So that's all the hands currently raised. But yeah, if there's any more questions from the presentation, then feel free to pop your hand up or stick a comment in the chat there. And also happy to open the room up a bit more broadly. We've got another 5 minutes or so for a discussion around stakeholder engagement and context of nature-based solutions a little bit more broadly. So yeah, any questions, queries, comments, feel free to share. And just while we're waiting for some more hands, quick question, I suppose, around the lack of respondents from the 0 to 25 age category. I suppose there's quite a big social movement at the moment with certain generations, younger generations, and linking to social media. You touched on potentially Facebook could be a reason why people are using different sites, but is there kind of any more analysis or understanding about why that age group hasn't necessarily been that engaged?
We haven't looked into it very specifically. Like I mentioned, we did predominantly use Facebook. I think advertising outside of that was done from direct sharing as well as emails. From experience, there seems to be a older generation using Facebook compared to, say, individuals under 26. Which is one of the limitations was, and I think we agreed in the team, we should have been using Instagram as well, as well as possibly going out in person and actually talking to people, which we couldn't do. But I think that was mainly down to using Facebook in general, generally an older audience. From the responses we received in the group, it was people over a certain age group seem to respond by typing certain comments and such like that. So yeah.
Great, thank you, David.
Yeah, I think another aspect of with the age is just the demographic of people living on the coast. That especially I know this is the case in North Norfolk, and I think Isle of Wight might be similar. Not sure about down in Cornwall. But it seems to me that it is a predominantly kind of retiree aging population, more so than the country average. So obviously targeting those regions specifically, you're more likely to get responses from people kind of in their 50s and 60s than any of the other age groups. So maybe that's a factor as well. And I had another thought, kind of coming back to Hannah's question about the ranking. I think it's interesting you say in Belgium that the aesthetics is ranked so highly, and perhaps the density of population is one of the main factors. But I also wonder if, in our case, it's the things that people are comparing it against have a major effect, because if people who are living on an eroding coast have to choose between safety and maintenance cost and long-term sustainability and aesthetics, then I would also put aesthetics low down. Where it's not that they don't like the aesthetics and they don't value it, but compared to the other things, it's just less important.